Hello. Thank you for finding your way here. Tonight, I am sitting in silence. But it is not the peaceful silence you know. This is a manufactured silence. A silence constructed of thick walls, of acoustic foam, of triple-paned, vacuum-sealed windows. I live in a box designed to keep the outside world from getting in, and more importantly, to keep something inside from getting out. My name is Arthur Finch, and I am a cursed storyteller. Every story I tell, every word I utter, is an act of betrayal, a betrayal of my own safety, and perhaps of yours. Because there are stories that are viruses. They don't spread through air or blood. They spread through sound, through the very vibrations carrying meaning that you are hearing right now. The story of St. Jude's Asylum on Echo Isle. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I sought out sound. I was an acoustic architect, a specialist in restoring historic spaces, giving them back their lost voices. I could walk into an old opera house and tell you why the sound was bouncing off the left balcony, or why a whisper on stage could be heard clearly in the last row. I lived by my ears. I believed in the physics of sound waves, in the mathematics of resonance. I was a man of science, of things that could be measured and proven. And then Mr. Davenport came to me. It was a March afternoon, when the last of the winter rains were still lashing against the windows of my office in Portland, Oregon. Harrison Davenport was a man made of old money and quiet power. His suit cost more than my car, but his posture was weighed down by an undisguisable grief. He placed a professional-grade digital recorder on my desk and a check with a number that made me sit up straight. "My son Liam is missing," he said, his voice even but unable to hide a tremor. Him and his group. 4 of them in total. They were documentary filmmakers, amateur ghost hunters, you know the type, always looking for abandoned places, spooky stories. "And where did they go?" I asked, though a bad feeling was already coiling in my gut. "Echo Isle," Davenport replied, "to that godforsaken place, St. Jude's Asylum." The name sent a chill down my spine, even though I'd never truly believed the rumors. Echo Isle, a small, jagged rock off the Oregon coast, perpetually shrouded in fog, and on it St. Jude's, a former asylum for those with sound-related afflictions. That was the polite term. The truth was, it was a madhouse, a place where they sent people haunted by voices in their heads, people who went suddenly deaf, or people who couldn't bear the silence. It was shut down in the 50s after a series of violent incidents and unexplained deaths. Since then, it had been left to rot, a source of local ghost stories. "The police searched," Davenport continued. "They found their camp, but no sign of them, only this." He pushed the recorder towards me. "This is Liam's last recording. It's all static. The police said it's useless, but one of their team knew of your work. He said if anyone could find something in this mess of noise, it would be you, Mr. Finch. My job was to restore sound, to filter out noise, to find the voices and whispers that were buried. It was a professional challenge, and that check could secure me a long vacation. I accepted. That was the first mistake. That night, in my perfectly soundproofed studio, I began my work. I plugged the recorder into my system, put on my professional headphones, and pressed play. The sound that flooded my ears was a wall of static, a thick, aggressive white noise. Like the sound of a radio tuned to a non-existent frequency between galaxies. But my experience told me there is no such thing as perfect static. There are always patterns, hidden frequencies, ghosts in the machine. I began the filtering process, layer by layer. I stripped out the high-frequency hiss, the low-frequency hum. I ran algorithms to search for the patterns of a human voice. Hours passed. The room was utterly silent except for me and that ghostly sound. And then I heard it. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was beneath the static, subtly hidden, a rhythm, a weak, almost imperceptible repeating sequence of sounds. It was like a heartbeat, but not quite. It was too slow, too mechanical. Thump, thump, thump. And between each beat there was a silence. An unnatural silence, a void-like silence so profound it seemed to suck in all other sounds around it. I played the section back dozens of times. That rhythm, it had a strange effect. It made me nauseous. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It felt like listening to the sound of something vast and ancient breathing in its sleep. And then, right after one of those silences, there was another sound. This time, clearer. A voice. Liam Davenport's voice. But he wasn't speaking, he was crying. No, not crying. Sobbing. A choked sob of absolute terror, cut off abruptly, and right after that, a scream. It was not a normal scream. I've heard hundreds of screams on crime scene recordings. Screams of pain, of anger, of fear, but this scream was different. It wasn't directed outwards, it was directed inwards. It was like the sound of someone being drained from the inside, as if their very soul was being pulled out through their throat. The scream lasted about 3 seconds, then it was choked, turning into a horrifying gurgle, and then static. Only the wall of static and that slow, monstrous beat remained. I ripped the headphones off, my heart hammering. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something terrible had happened on that island. Something my science couldn't explain. The next day, I called Davenport. I told him what I'd found. I told him I couldn't do anymore, but he begged. He doubled the number on the check. "Please, mister." "Finch," he said, "go there. Go to the island. Maybe with your equipment, with your ears, you can find something the police missed. Find out what happened to my son." Professional pride, a morbid curiosity, and greed. A deadly combination. I agreed. It was the final mistake. Now, as I sit here in this artificial silence, I can still hear it. That beat. It's not on the tape anymore. It's in my head. Thump, thump, thump. A constant reminder of the price of knowing, of the price of listening. This story is an attempt to exorcise it, to cast it out of my mind, but I fear that by telling it to you, I am only creating a copy, an echo. The trip to Echo Isle began with a ferry from a small, dreary coastal town called Port Sorrow. The name said it all. The sky was the color of cold steel, and the sea was a churning, angry gray. The ferryman, an old-timer named Silas, had a face as wrinkled as an old map and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't say much, just chewed his tobacco and stared into the thick fog ahead as if it were a solid wall. "Those kids," Silas spoke suddenly, his voice as hoarse as grinding stones. "The filmmakers. I brought 'em out last week. Full of piss and vinegar, eyes all bright. They didn't know what they were sailing into." "What do you know about this place, Mr. Silas?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Silas spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the sea. "Know enough not to set foot on it at night, or even during the day if I can help it." He squinted at me. "That place is sick, a sickness of sound. The fellas who built it, they thought they could cure the mad with silence, but they were wrong. They didn't create silence. They woke something up that lives in it." "Something?" "Locals call it the silent echo," Silas said, his voice dropping. "They say it ain't a ghost. It's an absence, a hole in the sound. When it's near, everything goes quiet, not peaceful quiet, dead quiet. Birds stop singing, wind stops blowing, even the sound of the waves just stops. And if you stay in that silence too long, it starts to fill you. It eats the sounds inside you, your voice, your thoughts, your soul eventually." His words sounded like a macabre fairy tale, but the way he said it, the genuine fear in his eyes, made it impossible to dismiss. "Did the kids have a lot of equipment?" I asked. "The works," Silas nodded. "Cameras, mics, EMF detectors. They said they wanted to record EVP, electronic voice phenomena. I told them they were looking for the wrong thing. The thing at St. Jude's doesn't talk, it listens." When the island emerged from the fog, I understood why it was called Echo Isle. Jagged black cliffs rose from the sea, eroded by the waves into bizarre shapes like the giant speakers of a dead god. And at the highest point, like a rotting crown, sat St. Jude's Asylum. It was a monstrous Gothic Victorian structure. Sharp spires clawed at the grey sky. Broken windows stared out at the sea like empty eye sockets. Ivy and moss clung to the stone walls, making it look as if it were being swallowed by nature itself. Silas nudged the ferry against a rickety pier. "I'll be back at sunset," he said, not looking at me. "Don't be late. I don't spend the night here." I hauled my cases of specialized equipment and stepped onto the island. Instantly I felt it. The change in the air. A heaviness. A pressure against my eardrums. Silas was right. The place was unnaturally quiet. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. The sound of my footsteps on the leaf-strewn path was jarringly loud, out of place. The group's campsite was a short distance from the shore, in a small clearing. A few tents had been flattened by the wind. The campfire was long cold. Everything had been left in a hurry. Open food containers, scattered clothes, as if they had fled from something in an instant. I began setting up my equipment, a series of highly sensitive microphones placed at strategic points around the area, a real-time spectrum analyzer, and most importantly, a device of my own invention, something I called the Sonic Memory Resonator. In theory, it could pick up residual sonic vibrations in an environment, the echoes of events that had occurred. Most scientists would laugh at me, but I'd had some startling successes with it in the past. As I worked, I found the first camera. It was half submerged in a mud puddle, the lens still pointed towards the asylum. The battery was completely dead. Not drained, dead. I connected it to a backup power source and checked the memory card. The last clip was recorded at 2 in the morning, 4 days prior. The screen flickered to life with a shaky, dark image, lit only by a weak flashlight beam. The camera was pointed at one of the tents. The panicked, heavy breathing of the cameraman was audible. "Do you hear that?" a voice whispered. Liam's voice. "It stopped. Everything just stopped." "What stopped?" a female voice asked, trembling. "Jessica, are you okay?" Silence. "Jess, answer me!" Liam shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The camera panned to the tent. The zipper on the tent flap slowly slid open. No one was pushing it. It opened on its own. And inside, it was empty. Jessica was gone. The clip ended abruptly. I felt a cold dread creep down my spine. They hadn't run off together. They were being taken one by one. I continued my search, moving cautiously towards the asylum. The closer I got, the thicker the silence became. It was no longer an absence of sound. It was a presence, an invisible wall pressing in on my body. My ears began to ache. The main door of St. Jude's had been torn from its hinges and lay splintered on the floor. The entrance was a massive hall with a soaring ceiling and a grand, rotting wooden staircase. Dust lay as thick as grey snow. Faint daylight filtered through the filthy windows, creating ghostly columns of light, and in the middle of the hall, I saw the first one. It was a young man, probably one of Liam's group. He was sitting, leaning against the base of the staircase. His eyes were wide open, staring at some point on the ceiling. His mouth was also wide open, as if in a silent scream. There wasn't a mark on him. His clothes were intact, but something was wrong. His face had a strange blue-gray pallor, and from his ears, eyes, and nose, rivulets of dried black blood had trickled, as if all the internal pressure in his body had been suddenly vacuumed out. I backed away, fighting the urge to vomit. This wasn't a murder. This was something else, something that violated the laws of biology. Steeling myself, I continued deeper inside. I had to follow a protocol. I had to create a map of horror for this place, as Silas had called it. I needed to identify the zones, the dangers. I mentally divided the building into 3 main areas based on old floor plans I'd found online. The administrative wing at the front, the patient wings to the left and right, and the treatment wing at the very back. The rumors said the most dangerous place was the treatment wing, specifically the anechoic chamber where they performed their most extreme experiments. In an office in the admin wing, I found the group's laptop. Its battery was also dead, but I was prepared. I connected it to my power pack and booted it up. On the screen was an open text file, apparently their journal. Day 2, the last entry read. "This place is weird. Sound doesn't obey the rules here. Our instruments keep glitching. Last night David said he heard music, a piano piece coming from the chapel, but when we went there it was completely silent. Jessica has been complaining constantly of tinnitus. She says she hears a constant hiss like static. Static, just like on Liam's recording. The strangest thing, the journal continued, are the dead spots. There are areas in this building, specific points where all sound just seems to vanish. You walk into one and suddenly you can't hear your own footsteps, your own breathing. It's like going instantly deaf. David calls them sonic voids. He thinks this is the key. He wants to set up a parabolic mic in one of the spots. A bad idea. A terrible, horrible idea. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. They treated it like a paranormal phenomenon to be documented, a ghost to be hunted. But it wasn't a ghost. It was a predator, and those sonic voids weren't dead spots. They were its mouths. I decided to check my own equipment. I returned to the main hall where I'd placed the sonic memory resonator. Its screen was flashing chaotically. It had recorded something. I put on my headphones, my heart pounding. At first, there was only the sound of wind whistling through the broken windows. But then I heard it. Faint, distant footsteps. Not my footsteps or the film crew's. These were heavy, shuffling footsteps, and they made no echo. Their sound died the instant it was made. And then, a voice. An old, dry voice, speaking from the past. Experiment 73, Patient E. They called him the musician. He claimed he could hear the music of the spheres. We placed him in the anechoic chamber for 72 hours. When we opened the door, he was gone. Only his clothes remained, neatly folded on the floor. And on the wall, he had used his own fingernails to scratch a single word before they were worn down to the bone. Listen. It was a recording from one of the old doctors, an echo from the past, trapped in these walls. But then, there was another sound. A sound from the present, very close, a scratching sound, a light, scraping sound coming from the floor above. Skr, skr, skr. I ripped off the headphones. The room fell silent again. But I knew I had heard it. It wasn't an echo. It was a real sound. Someone or something was still here. Fear told me to leave immediately, run for the pier and never look back. But I couldn't. The image of the dead young man at the foot of the stairs, Liam's scream on the tape. I had to know the truth. I pulled a flare gun from my bag, a pathetic comfort, but better than nothing, and I started towards the stairs, towards the scratching sound. Every step was a battle between my curiosity and my survival instinct. I chose curiosity, and I would pay the price for it. For the rest of my life, I slowly ascended the creaking staircase, each step groaning in protest. Dust rose with my every move, dancing in the weak shafts of light. The second-floor hallway was dark and stretched on endlessly. The doors to the patient rooms lined both sides like standing coffins. Most were slightly ajar, revealing the thick darkness within. The air here was even heavier, carrying an indescribable stench. It was the smell of decay, of sickness and despair that had soaked into every plank of wood, every brick over the decades. The scratching had stopped. The silence returned, more terrifying this time. It felt like a predator holding its breath, waiting for its prey to draw closer. I switched on my headlamp, its beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom, highlighting peeling paint and unidentifiable stains on the walls. I walked the length of the hall, glancing into each room. Inside were only rusted iron beds, tattered mattresses, and an infinite sadness. This was where broken souls had been imprisoned. I could almost feel their suffering, the echoes of their screams, their unanswered prayers. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, a door different from the others. It was made of thick steel with a small, yellowed pane of reinforced glass. On the door was a tarnished brass plaque, treatment wing, auditory observation. I approached it. The steel door was ajar. This must have been where the scratching came from. Holding my breath, I pushed the door gently. It opened with a jarring shriek, an obscene sound in the silence of this place. Inside was an old laboratory. Long tables were covered in dust, upon which sat strange equipment. Huge reel-to-reel tape recorders, oscilloscopes with cracked screens, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of magnetic tape reels stacked on rusted metal shelves. This was St. Jude's audio archive, the place where they recorded the mad ramblings, the screams, and the silences of their patients. In the center of the room, a wooden chair was bolted to the floor. Above it hung a metal helmet connected to a tangled web of dozens of wires. A torture device disguised as science. My eyes scanned the room, and then they stopped. On a table in the corner sat a thick, leather-bound journal. It was not covered in dust. Someone had been looking at it recently. I drew closer and opened it. It was the personal diary of Dr. Alistair Kane, the founder and director of St. Jude's. His handwriting was neat and scientific at the beginning, but towards the end it became a scrawled, frantic mess. He wasn't just trying to cure his patients, he was obsessed. April 12, 1951, I read. Another failure. Patient 42 ruptured his own eardrums with a paperclip. He said he would rather be deaf than listen to the gnawing static. This term again, the static. What is it? A mass auditory hallucination or something more tangible? June 3, 1951. I have had a breakthrough. I believe St. Jude's is not haunted. It is a focal point, a place where the veil between our world and the other is thin. And this thinness is not spatial, but frequential. There are sounds we cannot hear, frequencies beyond the threshold of human perception. I believe these patients, somehow their brains have attuned themselves to hear them. They are not mad, they are pioneers. My heart beat faster. Kane's mad theory bore a disturbing resemblance to what I was experiencing. I flipped to the last pages. Kane's script was now almost illegible. It is real. I have recorded it. The silent echo. It is not an absence of sound. It is an anti-sound. A negative sound wave with the ability to cancel out other sound waves. A sort of sonic antimatter. I have named it frequency zero. When it interacts with biological tissue, it creates a horrific resonance. It doesn't just silence sound, it silences cells, it silences life. Below the text was a frantic drawing, a diagram of a device, something that looked like a massive antenna connected to a series of amplifiers and vacuum tubes. Beneath the drawing was a single line, "The gate, I must amplify it, I must open the gate." He wasn't trying to study it, he was trying to summon it. A small noise behind me made me jump. I spun around, flare gun raised. Standing in the doorway was a person, or at least it had been a person. It was a woman wearing the tattered clothes of one of the film crew members, Jessica, but her face, dear God, it was chalk white, stretched and featureless. Like a porcelain doll. Her eyes were two empty black pits. Her mouth was just a thin, sealed line. She wasn't breathing, and she was scratching. Her hands, her fingernails broken and bloody, were clawing at the steel doorframe. Skr, skr, skr! A futile attempt to make a sound in a world that had stolen her voice. She didn't look at me. Her empty gaze looked through me. She was just a shell, a trapped echo. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, but I bumped against the leg of the table. The diary fell to the floor with a loud, echoing thud. The shell's head snapped towards me, a jerky, unnatural movement. It had heard me, and from its sealed mouth a sound began to emerge. Not a voice, a hiss, the static, the horribly familiar sound from Liam's recording. It grew louder and louder, filling the room, filling my head. It was like millions of insects crawling inside my brain. I covered my ears and screamed, but I couldn't hear my own scream. The static had swallowed it. The entity Jessica began to advance on me, shuffling forward. I backed away, tripped, and scrambled out of the room, never taking my eyes off it. I burst into the hallway and ran. I ran for my life, not caring which direction. I just knew I had to get away from that sound. I fled through the dark corridors, past the empty rooms. The static hiss chased me, an invisible tsunami of madness. I found a staircase leading down to the basement. Without thinking, I plunged down it, slamming the heavy wooden door behind me and bolting it shut. Below was darkness and the smell of damp. I switched on my flashlight. I was in a system of old brick tunnels, probably where the asylum's boilers and plumbing were housed. The hiss was quieter now, muffled by the thick door. I slumped to the floor, panting, trying to regain my composure. I had the answer. Dr. Kane had opened something he couldn't control, a parasitic sonic entity. It had turned the patients, and now Liam's group, into shells, mobile amplifiers for its presence. I had to destroy it. But how? How do you kill a sound? And then I remembered antimatter. Kane had written that the silent echo was an anti-sound, a negative wave. Basic physics, when matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate each other in a burst of energy. If the silent echo was a negative sound wave, then perhaps a positive sound wave, an extremely loud, pure sound, could neutralize it. But where could I find a sound like that in this god-forsaken place? And then I saw it. At the end of the tunnel, another door reinforced with steel. But this one had a symbol carved on it, a bell, the chapel. David, the crew member, had heard piano music from the chapel. Maybe there was something there, a pipe organ or a large bell, a powerful source of sound. It was my only hope. I stood up, brushing the dust from my clothes. The fear was still there, a cold animal coiled in my stomach. But now it had a companion, a cold determination. I was no longer an observer, I was a survivor, and I would not let this place take my sound. I made my way through the labyrinth of basement tunnels, my flashlight beam dancing across the damp brick walls. The air here was thick with the old smell of coal and neglect. I occasionally passed small rooms, likely storage or utility closets, where the ghosts of rusted machinery sat silent in the dark. The silence here had a different quality. It wasn't empty like on the upper floors, it was heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls had absorbed decades of the boiler's roar and the pipe's groans. Finally, I reached the door with the carved bell. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and immediately a strange sensation washed over me. The air here, it was cleaner. The oppressive, suffocating feeling seemed to lift. I was standing at the back of a small chapel. Dust-covered pews of dark oak sat in neat rows, facing a pulpit. Above the pulpit was a huge stained-glass window, which, though dirty and cracked, still allowed a stream of ethereal grey light to filter in, illuminating the dancing dust motes like a host of tiny angels. This place felt safe, like an oasis of sanity in an ocean of madness. Perhaps the faith of those who had prayed here had left an imprint, an invisible layer of protection against the asylum's evil. My eyes scanned the chapel, searching for a source of sound, and then I saw it. Not a bell, but a pipe organ tucked into an alcove. It wasn't large, but its metal pipes reached almost to the ceiling, gleaming faintly in the dim light. There it was, my hope. A pipe organ could create an immense volume, a complex and powerful wall of sound. If anything could fight the silent echo, this was it. I approached the organ, my heart beating a rhythm of hope. The keyboard was covered by a wooden lid. I slid it aside. The ivory keys were yellowed and cracked, but they seemed intact. But then, disappointment crashed over me. This organ needed electricity to function. Its blower needed power to push air into the pipes, and this entire island had been dark for decades. I slumped onto the organ bench, despair beginning to gnaw at me. I had come so close. I stared at the silent keys, and then I noticed something. Tucked between them was a folded piece of paper. It was old and brittle. Carefully, I took it out and unfolded it. It was a sheet of music, hastily handwritten, only a few bars. The melody was simple, almost like a lullaby, but there was something strange about it. The musical notations didn't quite follow the rules. There were circled notes, strange symbols I had never seen. And below the music, there was a single sentence. It hates harmony, it fears resonance. The key is not volume, the key is frequency. Frequency. Dr. Kane's words echoed in my head. Frequency zero. Suddenly I understood. This wasn't a battle of volume, this was a battle of acoustic physics. I didn't need to make a louder sound. I needed to make a true anti-sound, a resonant frequency that could shake the very structure of the silent echo, breaking it apart from within. This sheet music, perhaps it was that frequency. Perhaps the musician, Patient E, had figured it out before he vanished, a melody that could fight the monster. But the organ was dead. I looked around the chapel desperately, and my gaze fell on the stained glass window. It depicted a biblical scene. Saint Michael fighting the dragon, but there was a strange detail. Instead of a sword, Saint Michael was holding what looked like a tuning fork. Tuning forks. I shot to my feet. I remembered what I had seen in the treatment wing. The strange equipment. I had seen them, giant metal tuning forks mounted on wooden stands. Dr. Kane wasn't just studying sound, he was trying to create specific frequencies. A plan began to form in my mind, a crazy, dangerous plan, but the only one I had. I didn't need the organ, I could create the frequency. I had to go back to the treatment wing, but I couldn't go through the main hallways. The entity, Jessica, was probably still there, waiting. I looked around the chapel, searching for another way, and I found it. A small door, almost hidden by the organ. A choir door. I opened it. It led to a narrow, dusty corridor. A shortcut, perhaps. I stepped into the corridor, closing the chapel door behind me. The safety vanished. The oppressive silence returned. But this time I had a purpose. I was no longer prey. I was a hunter. The narrow corridor led me around the back of the asylum, bringing me closer to the treatment wing without having to directly confront the dangers of the central areas. I moved quickly but cautiously, every sense on high alert. I could feel its presence all around me, an invisible cold, a watchful stillness. I reached the steel door of the auditory observation room once more. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The Jessica entity was gone. The room was empty, but the air still held the reek of ozone and static like the afterimage of a nightmare. I hurried to the corner where the giant tuning forks were kept. They were nearly as tall as I was, made of stainless steel and mounted on wooden resonators. Each one had a specific frequency etched into it. 440 Hz, 528 Hz, 639 Hz. Kane had been trying to isolate healing frequencies and likely harmful ones too. I took out the handwritten sheet music. I'm not a musician, but I understand frequency. I could translate these notes: an A, a C sharp, a G. Each note corresponded to a specific frequency. This melody wasn't a melody. It was a formula, a sequence of frequencies that had to be played in a precise order and timing. I found the corresponding tuning forks. Luckily, they were all here. I needed 5 of them. I dragged them to the center of the room. Now for the hard part, how to activate them all at once and in the right rhythm. I needed something to strike them with. I looked around and found a metal rod, probably part of a broken stand. Perfect, but I knew the moment I made the first sound it would come. It would be drawn to the vibrations like a shark to blood. I had to work fast. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my frantic heart. I looked at the music one last time, memorizing the sequence of notes, and then I began. I struck the first tuning fork with the metal rod. Boom! A low, pure, sustained tone filled the room. It was a beautiful, clean sound, a stark contrast to the rotten silence of St. Jude's, and instantly I felt it, a shift in the air pressure, a sudden cold, and the static hiss began to return, faint at first, then rapidly growing stronger. It was coming. I didn't dare look. I focused on my task. I struck the second tuning fork. Bang! A higher note joined the first, creating a simple harmony. The static grew louder, more aggressive. I could hear shuffling in the hallway outside. I struck the third, then the fourth. Each new note was an act of defiance. The pure sound of the forks battled the chaotic hiss, creating a jarring dissonance, a war of frequencies. I glanced at the door. A black shape was forming in the threshold. It had no clear form. It was a distortion in the air, a man-shaped hole in reality. The silent echo, it was there. It had no eyes, but I felt it watching me. I had only one note left, the highest, most critical note in the sequence. The hiss was now unbearable. It was drilling into my skull. The room began to shake. Tapes fell from the shelves. The few remaining light bulbs on the ceiling flickered and burst. The black shape began to ooze into the room, swallowing the light as it moved. It reached out an arm made of static towards me. I could feel the energy being pulled from my body, a deathly cold spreading up from my feet. This was my last chance. I let out a defiant yell, and with all my remaining strength, I struck the final tuning fork. Keng! The sound, a high, crystal-clear note, tore through the air, and then something miraculous happened. As the 5 frequencies combined, they created a resonant cascade. An invisible sonic shockwave pulsed out from the tuning forks. It wasn't a sound you could hear with your ears. It was something you felt with your entire body, a vibration at a molecular level. The static entity convulsed. Its hiss turned into a scream of agony, a tortured distortion of sound and silence. It recoiled, its form beginning to disintegrate like a badly tuned television signal. I knew I had to maintain it. I kept striking the forks in their sequence, creating a loop of destructive harmony. Boom, buying, keng. The black shape was driven back to the center of the room. It contracted, swirling like a tornado of darkness and white noise. The light in the room bent around it. I felt like I was looking into a miniature black hole. And then, with a silent pop, an implosion of sound, it was gone. The static hiss cut out, silence fell. But this time it was a normal silence, an empty but peaceful silence. The oppression was gone. I stood there, panting, drenched in sweat. The metal rod fell from my hand. I had done it, I had won, but at what cost? As the adrenaline began to fade, I realized my ears, they were bleeding. A thin trickle of blood ran down both sides of my neck, and I couldn't hear my own breathing anymore. The resonance hadn't just destroyed the entity, it had destroyed a part of me. I stumbled out of the treatment wing, walking through corridors that now just seemed like harmless ruins. I found the bodies of the other 2 members of Liam's group. They had died just like the first, silent screams frozen on their faces. There was nothing I could do for them. As I walked out of the asylum, the sun was setting, painting the sky and the sea in blood-red hues. Silas and his ferry were there, a small dot at the pier. I had survived, but as I walked the path, I realized a part of St. Jude's would be with me forever. The silence in my ears wasn't peace. It was an absence, a void, an echo. That is my story. The story of how I lost the thing I treasured most. But that is not the end. Because as I said, some stories are viruses. After I returned, I tried to live a normal life. I received Davenport's check, but money couldn't fill the emptiness inside me. I was partially deaf, and my tinnitus was a constant, high-pitched hiss, a permanent reminder. I built this room, my fortress of silence, to escape the world, but I cannot escape what is inside. About a month ago, something changed. The hiss in my ears began to form patterns. It was no longer a chaotic white noise. Sometimes, for a brief moment, it would arrange itself into a rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't completely destroyed. A fragment of it, a final echo, had latched onto me. It had hidden in the silence it created within me, and it is slowly growing back. That is why I am telling this story. It is an act of desperation. I reread Kane's diary. He wrote, "It feeds on silence, but it spreads through sound. It is an information parasite. It needs a host to exist, but it needs a medium to travel. By telling you this story, by converting my memory into sound waves, I fear I have given it that medium. It is no longer trapped in me. It's now out there in these words, in the vibrations reaching your eardrums. Do not be afraid. That is what it wants. Fear creates a silence in the mind, a void for it to take root. I don't know what to do. I have tried everything, but it grows stronger. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see my reflection distort for a moment like television static. Sometimes I wake up to find I have been scratching at the soundproofed walls. I have only one final option, one final sacrifice. I have learned from Kane's mistake and from the wisdom of the musician. I cannot fight it with sound. I must fight it with silence, not a manufactured silence, but an absolute one. I will stop speaking. I will stop thinking in words. I will empty my mind, turn it into a desert, and give it nothing to feed on. I will become a shell, but a shell of my own choosing. These are my last words, a warning, a confession, and a farewell. If one day you hear an inexplicable static hiss in a quiet room, or if you feel an unnatural silence press down on the air, remember me. Make a sound, sing a song, scream, don't let the silence take hold. As for me, I am walking into the stillness, hoping that by doing so, I can take this monster with me. And now, the lengths, jinns,